a LitHub Radio podcast.
Hello, fathers and sons and mothers and daughters. I'm Grant Faulkner, father and son, and I'm here with my co-host, Brooke Warner, who's a mother and a daughter. And Brooke, we've featured the mother-daughter relationship in various ways on this podcast, but strangely enough, I don't think we've truly explored the father-son relationship in much depth. But today, we've got a great opportunity to do so because one of my favorite comedians, Roy Wood Jr., has just published a memoir, The Man of Many Fathers. And I want to note that this is not your typical celebrity memoir, or it's not really a celebrity memoir at all, because he's very seriously grappling with growing up Black in America. And a big part of that is reckoning with his relationship with his father, who died when he was 16. And as a result, Roy explores what he learned from other men who filled in the gaps and guided him into manhood, fatherhood after that. So my father and my relationship with my father has been very much on my mind since he died in 2017. And while I haven't written a lot about it, I expect to do so sometime soon. And Brooke, I know you have also had your father on your mind since he died even more recently.
Yeah, exactly. More recently, 2023. And yet it goes so fast. And, I did do a little bit of writing about him toward the end of his life because he had this kind of dramatic decline and what I now believe is long COVID that he was suffering from and probably eventually died from. And I was very grateful that it got published after he died, and it came out in an anthology about grief, which I then posted that piece on Substack as well. And it was quite a beautiful experience to write about him and what that experience was for me. And I think when we do that kind of writing, it is this way to commemorate and memorialize a relationship or a person. And so I hope I'll be able to, maybe hope and anticipate that I'll be doing more writing like that in the future for sure.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it myself and just exploring and finding, I guess, new angles on that relationship. And I think memoirs like Roy Wood Jr.'s that speak to our relationship to a parent who is the same gender as we are, they tend to bring out a lot of common themes. And I know mother-daughter memoirs certainly tend to share some themes, especially, for instance, when a daughter becomes a mother, which is often the catalyst for father-son reckoning as well. And I actually listed some of the topics and themes that are typical for father-son memoirs, and I think I relate to actually them all. So they seem very true to me. They resonate. And so just thinking about them, I'm one step closer to writing about my father. And so here goes. Here's some of the common traits of father-son memoirs. So many father-son memoirs explore emotional distance, fathers who are physically present but emotionally unavailable. And, that can lead to years or a lifetime of misunderstandings and estrangement. And then some sons and fathers also wrestle with questions of what they owe each other and where responsibilities for hurts or failures lie. And in fact, sons often grapple with what they've inherited genetically or psychologically or behaviorally from their fathers, and then whether they will repeat or resist those patterns. And I find also that many father-son memoirs circle around silences, what was never spoken and what couldn't be said, and what both parties, wish they had expressed before it was too late. So none of this is, in some ways it is really that emotional distance as a theme to fatherhood, which is unfortunate. But as I mentioned, if I was going to write a memoir about my father, all of these themes I think would form the major arc of my memoir. And Roy Wood Jr. probes them all as well in some fashion in his memoir. And so not to get too personal, Brooke, but do they resonate with you as well?
Yeah, I mean, definitely a lot of what you're unpacking there does. I do think there are things that I'm curious about, things that weren't said or silences, but I think it's interesting to me that when I think about, where I would probe into a relationship, it would probably be more with my mom than with my dad. And all of us are different. I mean, of course, there are also daughter-father memoirs, and, it goes every which way. I think there are different ways that our parents impact us. But yeah, those things do resonate. And I'm also just curious about all the different kinds of relationship dynamics that exist, in part because I'm very psychologically curious. I'm always interested about people's relationships. And I think that's why I like these kinds of memoirs as well. I just appreciate the exploration of the child parent relationship. And there's a reason that these are lasting stories. We always want to get into, excavating these relationships that mean the most to us. And sometimes they mean the most to us in part because they're plagued by silences or absences or things left unsaid, or things that might have been hurtful. I'm thinking about the actor Alan Cumming, who wrote a father-son memoir called Not My Father's Son. And it's a book that centers on him finding out that the man who raised him was not his biological father. But more to the point in that book is that this father who raised him was also very abusive, terribly so. And most of that abuse was directed at Alan and not his brother. And so there was this powerful release that happens for Alan when he's an adult and he finds out that this man is not his biological father. And it allows him to reckon with the idea, perhaps heal from the notion that, this abuse that he suffered at his father's hand was really not about him. And so it's a powerful book in that way. Just one that came to mind. And I guess as I'm talking about that, Grant, I'm curious about other father-son memoirs that you've read.
Yeah, I think of Paul Auster, who wrote a Portrait of an Invisible Man, which is a long essay that is the first part of his 1982 memoir, The Invention of Solitude. And it's interesting because he finds his father elusive even in death, and he discovers this family photo album that's just blank inside. And Auster thinks that's the perfect symbol for this elusive heritage that he's inherited. And sons often discover, that they've misunderstood or failed to truly see their fathers. And Roy Wood Jr. gets into that when we talk to him as well. But also fathers, failed to understand who their sons really are. And so reconciliation, or the attempt at it, or the failure of it, is central to many of these memoirs. And some achieve it before death, and others, like Auster, they've got to reckon with their fathers only after they're gone. And maybe we're always reckoning with our parents. Maybe that never quite ends. But one other memoir I'm very into, and actually because I was so haunted by it when my son Jules was born, and it's David Sheff's Beautiful Boy. And it's about this very harrowing journey that the family went through when David Sheff's son, Nick, became really deeply addicted to drugs, and especially meth. And he even ended up living on the streets. And both Nick and David struggle to understand and cope with their feelings of guilt and evaluate the degree to which they're personally responsible for the addiction. And, David wonders things like, did his divorce influence the addiction or cause it? And, there's this really kind of tragic desire to help and being unable to help, which a lot of parents, we all find ourselves in that position at some point. And Brooke, I remember you liked The Tender Bar a lot, and it was or is kind of similar to The Man of Many Fathers because it addresses the lessons of manhood or fatherhood that are imparted by men other than the father. So I'm just curious to talk again with you about The Tender Bar and hear more about why that's a significant memoir for you.
That book by J.R. Moiringer, which, is definitely positioned as a book about men, about an absent father, but which is as much or more about his relationship with his mother. It made an impact on me for sure. It was a classic coming of age story, very beautiful sort of seminal memoir for sure. And J.R., like our guest today, Roy Wood Jr., found role models in men who were not his father. Part of it's called The Tender Bar because he, has these men who he's connected to down at the local bar. And he's, basically, they are role models for him, but they're also problematic in their own right. And, JR only knows his father as the voice because his father hosts a radio show and he comes to hear it from time to time, but he barely knows his dad. He sees him so infrequently. But I just liked this memoir for all kinds of reasons. It's about the impact that other people have on us. In his case, men who were not his father, his family, his mother. And it makes me happy that we're centering this topic too, because, there are men who take my memoir classes and oftentimes they're looking for books that feature men's stories in whatever shape. And The Tender Bar is a great guy's story in that it explores masculinity and tenderness, belonging and not belonging, and so much more than that too.
Yeah. Well, it's similar because the central message of the Man of Many Fathers, is similar to that. And because even in the absence of a biological father, Roy Wood Jr. finds a path to learning and becoming, the parent he needs to be, and the parent that also he needed, I think, in exploring that. And legacy is certainly a big part of being a parent. I remember when I had Jules, I had the very poignant realization that my life would inevitably be some sort of guide or model for him. And, I was just struck by wanting to offer a life that was helpful, that definitely didn't do any harm. And there's a frequent joke among parents, and perhaps especially new parents, that our kids will one day be talking about us in therapy, when they're adults, because none of us really know what we're doing. We're just trying. And, I suppose that might be true for all of us, because we're human and we're complicated. And, we're all imperfect parents, as I said, even though we're trying to be as perfect as we can. So, yeah, it's just interesting because we want to provide those guideposts to a good life, and having a child motivated Roy Wood Jr. to write this. And it certainly motivated me to, take stock of my life. I think about what writing I'll leave behind for my kids. And this is also important too, because I was thinking on a bigger level than just a personal life. Boys and young men are said to be really struggling these days. And I recently read an article in the Times that said that across their lives and their educational achievement, mental health, and transitions to adulthood, that, there are a bunch of warning signs that boys and young men are falling behind, even as, the female peers are doing really well.
Yeah, and that concerns me. Of course, I think about it a lot as a parent to a teenager right now. It's just hard out there. Our culture makes it hard for kids, and maybe boys and girls differently, but I do see that. And it makes me just think about the important role of memoirs like this to begin with, memoirs that allow us to reflect on our own upbringings. And for those of us who are parents, it's always a good moment to pause and reflect on the legacy that we're creating, that we're leaving. Being a parent is probably the single most challenging thing any one of us who is a parent will ever take on. Obviously kids don't come with instruction manuals, and every child and every parent is different. And so we all have to find our way. And I do also think, one of the primary reasons people are drawn to write their memoirs in the first place is for understanding. And so if you have a complicated relationship with a parent, or, trying to understand how you parent or even understand your child, then taking something like this on is really meaningful. And reading these kinds of books is really meaningful too. So I'm excited to talk to Roy Wood Jr. after this short break about all of this and much more.
Well, Brooke, I'm always so pleased when we have a sponsor whose products and services I've actually used and enjoyed independently. And that's the case with Gotham Writers Workshop. I took my first class with them nearly 20 years ago, and it was an online class, my first online class ever. And I had my MFA at the time, and I have to say that my Gotham class was as good as any of my MFA classes. And in fact, the great writer Manuel Gonzalez taught it. But it wasn't just about Manuel. All of the students in the course were super smart and really good writers. And amazingly enough, I'm still in touch with some of them. So I wholeheartedly recommend taking any of Gotham's courses.
I love that so much. And Gotham definitely has a high pedigree, and it's been around for a long time. They offer creative writing classes in New York City, but also over Zoom, and also asynchronous classes that you can take online. And so you can be anywhere in the world. And they have an amazing breadth of offerings, Grant. They offer memoir classes, woohoo, but also other nonfiction, as well as fiction, poetry, songwriting, and many others, and with super qualified instructors and for an affordable price.
Yeah. And as I mentioned, they are very much about community. So you can stay involved with Gotham in a number of ways. And they even put on conferences. And writers often ask me how to find a writing group or a beta reader. And I think taking a class is a great way to find good writing partner matches. So develop your craft and join a vibrant community of writers at Gotham Writers Workshop.
Yes, you can find them at gothamwriters.com to see what classes are starting. Use our code, please, Memoir Nation at checkout for $40 off your first 6 or 10-week class. Some restrictions apply there, but definitely go check it out. And so endorse them, Grant.
Yeah. So one more time, visit gothamwriters.com to see what classes are starting soon, and use the code Memoir Nation, all one word, Memoir and Nation with no space between them, at checkout for $40 off your first 6 or 10-week class. Some restrictions apply. And tell them that Grant sent you. and Brooke too. Welcome back, everybody. I'm beyond excited to introduce Roy Wood Jr. with us today. He is a two-time Emmy-nominated writer and producer. He is a comedian, actor, and podcaster who's primarily known for his stand-up comedy work, and I bet most of you know him as a correspondent on Comedy Central's The Daily Show, which he appeared on for 8 years, and now he's hosting CNN's Have I Got News for You? He also hosted the 2023 White House Correspondents' Dinner and this year's 85th Peabody Awards. He has created original half-hour scripted projects at Fox, NBC, and Comedy Central. He is the former host of the award-winning Comedy Central podcast, The Daily Show, Beyond the Scenes, and he remains a regular guest star on various ESPN shows, and now he lives in New York. Welcome, Roy.
Hello. How the heck are you doing today?
I'm doing well. I'm so happy that you're on our show. And I loved your book, and I went through some of the feelings that you had when you had your first child. Like when I had my first child, I just suddenly, it forced me into a reckoning into who I was and how I was living. And I didn't quite count on that, at least for it to be so profound.
Yeah.
And as a way to introduce your book to our listeners, you said The Man of Many Fathers was inspired by the death of your father when you were just 16 years old, and then your journey to define the kind of father you want to be for your own son. So I was wondering, can you tell us more about that origin story for the book and what it means to you?
I think that for me, and it's one of those things where, I can't speak for women in motherhood, but I would imagine any first-time parent goes through some degree of a self-audit of who you are. And then you audit your parents, and for the first time, you're forced to see them as human beings and not just as the people who raised you or gave you all of your trauma or whatever and your quirks. For me, there was this list of things I wanted to do with my son, and I'm going to teach him this value, and I'm going to teach him, what values do I want him to have? Okay, always show respect. Be kind to people. Make sure you're around people that pour into you positively. Don't snitch. Don't do drugs. Where did I learn all of that? And the more I started reconciling in my head the best examples of me learning those lessons, a lot of those moments did not include my father. And some of it was because he was in and out the house. But a great degree of it was because he just passed before I reached that maturation point of even knowing that those were questions I needed to ask. And so this book originally was just supposed to be a Word document for my child. I was going to just type everything I feel in the rawest form and put it on an SD card. I'm going to write it. It may as well be a book. Well, if it's going to be a book, I may as well do a book proper. Okay, well, you know what? I guess we're writing a book. And that was kind of thing one about it. And that was 2016 when I have all these thoughts when my son is born. I start making a list of people and thinking of who the various, quote, fathers are. And COVID hits, and somewhere around 2021, I get an invitation to be on Finding Your Roots with Dr. Henry Louis Gates. And Dr. Gates starts telling me all of these things about my pops I never knew. I didn't really go around my dad's side of the family, so I didn't know any family lore or history. Both of my grandparents on his side were dead before I was born, and I just never really thought to ask questions about those people. Come to find out, my father lost his dad when he was 4 years old, and I never knew that. And finding that out, and then finding out the reasons for my father's physical disabilities and how they tied into his relationships with women as a teenager. And that, I'm my mother's only child, but I'm the 9th of 11 kids by my dad. So it started to force me to look at him differently, and in a way that was a lot more sympathetic than I think I'd given him in the past. It didn't change how the things that I didn't get emotionally as a child, it didn't change who I was, but at least in that understanding, it gave me the last puzzle piece I needed to actually sit and write the book. And that's, 2021 is kind of when I started that journey of putting the manuscript together. And Yeah, that was so it's kind of like the genesis for the idea and then the genesis for me to actually get up off my ass and sit down and write this book.
Well, thanks for bringing some of that context and foundational stuff about your dad, because I wanted to ask a follow-up question to that. Roy Wood Sr. is your dad, and he was a pioneering Black radio journalist, civil rights activist, and entrepreneur. And many Black media professionals from the 60s through the 90s worked with him or were hired by him. But he was also shaped by the Jim Crow South and the harsh realities of being Black in America. And you just started to speak about this, like that those experiences started to become more apparent to you as you unpacked all of this. And I'm curious, as you learned all of that, how did you see that as like a funnel for what you wanted to tell your son?
Well, I think before I could get to my son, I had to get to myself. My pops covered all of these news events that essentially, if he were still alive today, would be a lot of the same things that I covered on The Daily Show. Only difference is that I had a couple chuckles in what I chose to cover. I don't think my dad had much of a sense of humor. Like, I never saw him watch a sitcom. I'll just put it that way. He watched the news and Jeopardy and C-SPAN. The end. Didn't watch sports. No chuckles, no fun, no nothing. So for me, looking at who he was forced me to take a long look at, well, for whatever disdain or frustrations I had and wants I had for the father I wish I had gotten, I can't ignore that, oh, damn, I'm exactly like him. I'm just a little funnier. Okay, well, if I'm going to help my son identify pieces of himself, then I have to delve deeper into who my dad was and what he meant to people. And I found so many similarities. So if those things were in my dad that are in me, I can only assume them to also be in my son. So then it becomes a matter of deciding what pieces of you are unhealed so you can fix that as best you can, or just be cognizant of it in the moments with your son so you don't pass those. Like a great example is, I don't think my father and I spent much time together. There definitely was never a change or communication of emotion. Like, he might say, I love you every now and then, but usually he was saying, I love you. It was on the backside of yelling with my mama. So basically, look, I like you, but she be getting on my nerves. Anyway, let's go get some groceries. So the idea of something as simple as just being present and spending time with my son, having moments of stillness with him, going on a road trip, talking, laughing, watching movies together. My son and I have inside jokes with each other. He's 9 now. I never had that. And so rather than sit and go, oh, my daddy never played catch with me, you have to go, no, I'm going to play catch with my son. Let's see what this does. Let's see for a generation or two what showing up looks like in this bloodline. And so that's what, the more I learned about him, the more it inspired and informed the choices I made with my child.
That's a beautiful definition of parenthood, Roy, and fatherhood in particular. And when you wrote this, you asked yourself the question, when have I seen love? And I love that as a question for anyone to ask themselves about their lives. Sometimes I don't think we pause to really recognize or search for that answer. And you just told us about how you experienced, maybe it wasn't the absence of love because your father loved you, right? He just loved you in a different way than maybe you love your child.
It was hard to quantify his love for me and his disdain for my mother concurrently, or his disrespect for my mother concurrently. Mm-hmm. And I think he read that, but I don't think he ever really cared to really get deep or do anything about it. I definitely wanted to have something here as a piece, if not for my son, for my grandchildren, whenever he has kids and they want to try and put some things together. Maybe this helps. I don't know. What I have learned with my child is that these moments of stillness begat the bonding. I'll give you an example. So I sometimes work with the City of Birmingham Division of Youth Services for charitable stuff. So they set up XYZ program and baseball league and basketball and video game contests at the YMCA, all of these things to create these atmospheres for young children to feel appreciated and loved on by adults. You know, I've worked with mentorship groups in the city of Birmingham, and they're hyper focused on young men age 12 to 18. It's a very specific group. And so I've gone to functions like that. And, you know, my schedule is too erratic to be a big brother in the framing of that type of mentorship. But what I noticed is that more often than not, you could be all day with some kids doing the thing, and then it's the last 2 minutes before you go, while everybody's putting on their coat and it's just you and him over here, that they'll ask you something distinctly profound. And I found my son and I having those moments as well. And I'm like, okay, yeah, you want to go to the go-kart track, and yeah, we went to the ball game and ate a hot dog. But 9 times out of 10, these opportunities to reach and have real breakthroughs with your children, they're quick. It's a blinking you miss moment. Mm-hmm. You can't set it up like some big grand mentoring ship, activity palooza. Those things matter, but the windows of opportunity to do anything, they're very fast, and you have to jump on. And my son it'll just be in the middle of, we'll walk around the house making R2, this is a literal thing, making R2D2 noises. We'll just communicate with each other. And through charades, you know what I'm saying. Go brush your teeth, whatever. We'll be in the middle of making R2D2 noises. And then 30 seconds later, what's the most scared you've ever been? Which is a very profound question if I choose to really answer it honestly. Because the answer is, when I found out you were coming, and figuring out how to make sure that my life was in a place where I can make sure you have what you need. So how do you answer that question without the child feeling like a burden? Because as I talk about in the book, part of the reason why I am the way I am is because I never wanted to feel like a burden to my mother. So I worked so I could have my own money, so she didn't have to worry about it. But I'm 13 and I'm working 25, 30 hours a week. Nobody should work like that, but you have to, because sometimes your pops won't pay a bill because he's mad at your mom. So you have to know that about yourself, because even as I tell my son the truth, I don't want to corrupt him. And that's why it's important to understand yourself. You know, you're trying, like you're a car and you're trying to fix yourself while building another one concurrently, and you don't even know if your wires are correct. So I don't know. I try to love on them as best I can, but I know that the opportunities for there to be real connection, you don't know when they're coming. It's just a weird comet orbit of logic. He'll ask something like, were you sad? I'm in a co-parenting situation, and there may be something as quick as, what do you do when I'm not here during the week? Or are you sad when I'm not here? And 30 seconds later, we're making R2D2 noises.
Right.
So, it's just a different thing. It's a different thing.
Roy, do you mind if we do the rest of the interview in R2D2 voices?
I'd have to opt out. I don't think I can do it. I love yours, though. Well, Roy, continuing on this theme of father loss, after your dad died, you turned to the men in your community for guidance, and you learned things in what you call unexpected classrooms, which I love. Those classrooms were led by anyone from laborers on job sites to comedians like Lavelle Crawford and D.L. Hewley backstage. So could you say a little bit more about how these surrogate fathers or unexpected classrooms shaped you?
I don't think, the interesting thing about the book is that most everyone that I learned something from, I don't think was trying to teach me anything. I don't think they necessarily all saw me as some young, especially my coworkers. Like any story involving a coworker, I think I said it in the book, like a job is interesting because as a teenager or whenever you start working, a job is the first time you are around adults who really don't give a damn about you. Your teacher kind of cares, your pastor cares, the scoutmaster, your coach, your aunt and uncle, everybody around you has some degree of sense of, even if it's subconscious, a responsibility to the betterment of my coworker in the dish room does not care about me as a human being. I'm going to snort cocaine in front of you. And if you snitch on me, I'm going to slap you in the mouth. And then we're going to go back to work. And then I get in my head, oh, if I snitch, you'll get fired. Wrong. So then the lesson becomes, if people are good at their job, employers change the rules for those people. And please believe, cocaine is a serious performance-enhancing drug if we are talking about washing dishes. So there's a lesson in that, but that person didn't set out to seek that. I really, honestly, a lot of this book is moments of retrospection of, oh, wow. And I really had to get to the root of some things. I look at, like I don't like, cause like you almost in a way, I'm holding my son in that delivery room and in a weird way, I'm trying to figure out why I am who I am. I don't really trust overly nice people. So yeah, son, don't trust overly nice. Well, damn, why do I feel that way? What happened? Let's go back. Okay, that was a nice person. Did you trust him? No. Did you trust him? No. Oh, it's because my boss in high school was setting me up to try to molest me. Okay, that's why I don't trust overly nice people. Got it. I trust people who are kind of annoyed with me. Like when I ask you a favor, you're kind of annoyed. That's real sincerity. If anybody is too nice, they want something in return. May not always be sex or something weird like that, or some workplace harassment situation like what I stumbled into in the book, but be leery of people that are too nice. Doesn't mean that that their intentions aren't genuine, but I need to just know. I need to know. So you really have to kind of like work your way back,
That's so interesting as a process. And this book is titled The Man of Many Fathers, but, your mother plays a huge role in this book, and she's a hero for her dedication to you and also her dedication to her own, self-improvement and advancement. So I was curious, was your mother a type of father figure too?
Yeah. She's the first chapter in the book. My dad, until third grade, when we moved to Birmingham, my pops was just kind of a recurring, he'd pop in. My dad was like Wilson on Home Improvement. I'm aging myself with some of these listeners, but, he was the wacky neighbor who popped in from time. Newman on Seinfeld, if you will. So yeah, my mother was very much a commanding presence, and she gave me and it was important to include her because it's not like I did not have powerful women in my life and women who have helped me along my way. Those women tended to I would stumble upon them luckily. Whereas the men I wanted to be around, I sought it out. I lingered a little longer at the comedy club after the show because I want to hang with D.L. Hughley after the show because I want to see what else can I get from him. I just got to I was in awe. And a lot of that was subconsciously, I believe, because my pops wasn't there anymore. So any wisdom or advice I could get, it felt like something wise. But to understand why I was processing particular things later in the book a certain way, you have to understand the work ethic and the tenacity and the thirst for independence that I had, which came from those K through 3 part of my life, from when I was a latchkey kid. I had to be independent, and that sense of independence was my weapon of survival in the middle years of my education when my pops was tripping. And then that same independence and that same degree of self-reliance became paramount when I started doing stand-up comedy. I don't even think I would have even made it to the finish line had I not had what my mother had instilled in me. And a lot of it, partly circumstance. Pops wasn't here. My mom is always in night school, getting a grad degree, law degree, master's degree. So because she was gone a lot at night, I was extremely self-reliant. And that self-reliance, when you're on the road and you are alone and there is no one there, comedians talk about a lot of stuff on the road, but they ain't really sharing their darkness and sadness with each other. You're not getting a pep talk after a show. You're hanging around for liquor, or you're trying to have sex with strangers. Either that, or you're trying to drive back home so you can do your radio job the next day. So it doesn't leave a lot of time for therapeutic moments. You sneak them here and there, but that wasn't the norm. So yeah, my mother, she is the baseline ingredient of who I am. I cannot tell the story of how my interactions with my father and all of these other people affected and changed my DNA if you don't know the base ingredients. And so those base values and tenacity, that all came from my mother. So it was important to start with her because, you know, that's my biggest teammate. At times she's been my mortal enemy, but now my biggest fan. You know, we're best friends in that regard. You know, everybody talks about your parent, you know, once a man, twice a child, or whatever the phrase is, where your parents eventually become your kids again or whatever. But I don't think anybody talks about that brother, sister, sibling phase. If you got a healthy interaction and you have a parent that respects you as an adult and does not constantly try to berate or lord over you, there's a very enjoyable sibling period that my mother and I are in. And, you know, I don't know. It's beautiful. It's beautiful to be able to look back and laugh at some of this stuff, you know. I think the thing that troubled me the most about writing this book was not knowing how it would affect her. I cannot talk about how my pops made me feel without talking about the disrespect he laid at her feet. And our parents have had a way of protecting themselves and insulating themselves from the negativity, or you've created your own house to block out all of that stuff. That stuff is 30 years ago, 40 years ago. And now you got your kid writing a book talking about this nonsense. And then your friends are going to read it. And now they're going to know all your business and stuff that you did. Well, not all. I didn't tell everything. I told the parts of their dysfunction that affected me. So yeah, I was very nervous about that. She's read it. We haven't had a talk about it yet, though.
Wow.
We haven't had a talk. It's coming. I know, you know, it's coming.
It's a big deal. And you're speaking to something that we hear a lot of our guests who write memoir speak of, for sure, you know, that ripple effect and how much to tell. And so thank you for sharing that. I want to make sure that we fit in a question about what the world, you know, what our society is calling a boy crisis or a man crisis, you know, that not only are boys performing worse in school than girls, but their mental illness rates and suicide rates have been going up. I think there are many causes for this. I have a 14-year-old son myself, but there was this one quote from your book that I wanted to read and maybe just have you expand upon a little bit in the context of that crisis. You said, the masculine culture that I was immersed in was full of confidence building and discipline. Rarely was it full of compassion and gentleness. There were more handshakes than hugs. I can count on one hand the truly sentimental moments I've had with my father or any male relative or any man.
I'm not sure if that's for better or worse. It definitely gave me a degree of tenacity. I'm not sure. It's like in Call of Duty or like any video game, right? Or any militaristic thing where so my son, he's big into vehicles and, car aviation, whatever. And we'll end up down a rabbit hole of militaristic vehicles. And the trade-off is always armor for protection or no armor, which makes you lighter and faster and more maneuverable. And so this idea of me having, I'm tough because I never had to engage in emotion. Therefore, things don't bother me emotionally and something can happen and I can keep on trucking, no problem. Well, that's efficient. I don't know if that's healthy. But then I also don't know if it's healthy to need a hug and talk about it every time life punches you in the mouth. Because sooner or later, you got to get up, you got to recover from it. And so how long to sit? I feel like I don't want to call it an overcorrection, but there has yet to be a conversation about, well, how long do you sit with it? All right, the thing happened and you want to feel the feeling and you want to sit still about it. And, like I try with my child, it's kind of one of those things of, all right, you're sad about the thing. Let me know when you want to talk about it. And you may not want to talk about it today. Okay, cool. Well, I'm going to come back to you tomorrow. And you may not want to talk about it then. But I'm going to keep coming back to you. You're not going to run I'm not going to let you get off the hook with this. Versus, when I was growing up, and I'm 46 for, just for reference for the listeners. When I was growing up, why is he sad? He said, because, boy, ain't nothing wrong with that boy. Boy, get up and get back. And people will completely dismiss whatever your emotional grievance was. I do think that feeling emotionally seen and being given space to feel your emotions, I think it's important for men. I think it's very important. I just don't know where the line is in feeling the emotions versus hiding from the world. And I don't believe you can hide from the world. And I don't know where that line is. I think you're better off. I think it's a better place to be on the emotional side than the callous side or whatever you want to call it. Like the day my dad died, I went to school. He died on a school day. And he died of prostate cancer also. So, cancer kind of gives you a little bit of runway to reckon. So by the time the death happens, it's not like, say, when my aunt died in a car crash and it's a baseball bat to the face of, a surprise and trauma. We knew. And so I wanted to go to school because I wanted to get, for me, you just got to keep pushing. I didn't want to sit with that. And I get to school, and because it's all over the news, everybody at school is looking at me weird because I'm at school, even though my dad died. So now I get sent home. And I'm furious. I'm legitimately furious because I'm not allowed to deal with this the way I want to deal with it. And in hindsight, yeah, you probably should have went somewhere to sit down, kid. But I just, it just, for me, even when I got home, I didn't sit in the house and just be sad. Sit and do what? He's dead. The bills still have to get paid. We're going to get evicted at the end of the month. All right, well, I'll go to Subway. You can send me home from school? Bet. I was at work by noon being a sandwich artist. And then the next day, I was out going from pawn shop to pawn shop trying to sell my pop's cameras so we could have some money. So, I think that even having the freedom to be able to stop and think is a privilege. To even be able to pause for a moment and live in your emotions and not acknowledge the rest of the pressures around you, I think that's a privilege that a lot of self-care and therapy advocates don't necessarily consider. A lot of folks are just stressed, and those stressors are not going to stop because you did yoga, because you went on your morning run. And I think sometimes if we're not careful, and a part of this is probably capitalism, you become obsessed and locked in on whatever the next thing is. And so, as best I can, I give my son some runway to breathe and be himself. But how much runway to give him, I do not know.
I don't think most of us truly do, but it's good just to entertain the question and probe it like you just did, I think. At least that's the way I feel with my own kids and myself.
Yeah.
Roy, in closing, we haven't talked about your career much as a comedian. And I'm curious, how has your life in comedy perhaps been a type of father to you? And what have you learned from comedy that has either, affected yourself as a man and or as a father?
The biggest thing I learned from comedy is that you get whatever you put into it. And you persevere through the failures. One of the best things about comedy is that the audience is forgiving. As long as it's different if you're offensive, but if you're just not funny, you still get to come back tomorrow and try again. And you're judged solely on the new performance. Like that's a beautiful thing, Comedy has always been something therapeutic. I think it also has always shown me that I'm not alone in thinking the way I think or feeling what I feel about the world. So I think at its core, comedy has always shown me that I'm not alone. So once you know that, then you can kind of rationalize your feelings a lot better.
Well, thank you so much, Roy. This was instructive to me as a person and as a father. Still a father, even though that son I led the show with, he's 25 now.
Oh, wow.
Thanks, Roy. It's an important book. I think people are going to get a lot out of it.
Thank you.
We'll be right back with today's book trend.
Brooke, we're going to go a bit off topic from today's show for the trend this week because it's Halloween week, and we want to make sure that we give a nod to something spooky, and we do have a somewhat ghoulish trend to report on. It's actually quite dark, and that's that true crime memoir is on the rise. At first, we weren't sure if this was just anecdotal, but we found evidence in the form of stories and just the sheer number of true crime memoirs being published that it's a thing. And just in time to celebrate all things dark and creepy and murderous, which we like to do once a year.
That is right, Grant. And notably, Pages and Prose did a story about the surge in true crime's popularity. And while it should be said that not all true crime is memoir, of course, more and more, I think we're seeing that the right people to write these stories are people close to the stories. Sometimes they are close to the victims, adjacent to the victims. Sometimes they're the survivors, and sometimes they're adjacent or close to the perpetrators. So, these people are, they have all the goods to be able to come out with these true crime stories, and they are popular more and more so.
Actually know a friend who's writing one, but we did a little digging, and two of the most anticipated true crime memoirs right now are the posthumous memoir by Jeffrey Epstein's most outspoken victim. Her name is Virginia Roberts. I think it's Giuffre, and that book just came out last week, and already it's resulted in Britain's Prince Andrew having to relinquish his title and all honors, and that was just in the weeks leading up to the book's publication. So this memoir is called Nobody's Girl, a memoir of surviving abuse and fighting for justice, and it's coming out 6 months after, unfortunately, the author died by suicide. And the other one we're tracking is Giselle Pellicot's memoir, which is forthcoming in 2026. People will remember her as the French victim of sex crimes, which were perpetrated by her ex-husband and then many other countless men who he invited over to their home to rape her while she was drugged. And while this is, and it was, obviously an historic story and it made international headlines, public health, she's also made a kind of heroic name for herself, not as a victim, but as a hero for the way she's chosen to handle the revelations, by waiving her right to anonymity in trial, for instance. And, she just refuses to be seen as a victim. And people are incredibly inspired by her. And I'm really happy to see that she has this memoir forthcoming.
Yeah, I am one of the people who has been inspired by her for sure, because I was equal parts horrified and riveted by that story as most people were. And I think this is probably the appeal of true crime in the first place, in that we really can't believe the details of these disgusting, terrible crimes that people commit. And then we're fascinated by how it impacts people, how people behave in the aftermath of such things, what the ripple effects are. We're actually publishing a book on She Writes Press in the spring called The Most Wonderful, Terrible Person, a memoir of murder in the Golden State, which is about a notorious crime that took place in 1968, in which Lucille Miller was accused of murdering her husband. And the author is the daughter of Lucille Miller, Deborah Miller, who is now an adult, obviously. This many years later, in 1968, she was 14 years old, and her mother was accused of this crime, and she went to prison and she was incarcerated. And the book is really about that, plus the decades of emotional wreckage that the crime left in its wake, which I would argue is ongoing all the way to today. So these things have, major, major consequences for the people involved. Obviously not the least of which is the person who is murdered. Like that person's life ends, but the wreckage is just really phenomenal to see when you read these stories. And I would also offer that Amanda Knox's Free could be characterized as true crime. The reason we're fascinated with that story is because of the crime that precipitated it. But there's so much more to that story, because there was the original crime, which was the murder of Amanda's roommate, Meredith Kircher. But then there was also the crime perpetrated against her by the Italian government in Amanda's being wrongly incarcerated, which, had the reverberating effects for Amanda that I think are pretty well known.
Yeah, it's a wonderful memoir, and she was an unforgettable guest when we had her on earlier. I learned so much from her and think about her so often. So I'm really happy to announce that Amanda's going to be teaching for Memoir Nation in January, and we're just obviously very super excited about this. And she's inspired both of us so much, and she'll be teaching and sharing about a course titled Reclaiming Your Story. And I can't think of a better messenger for that topic than Amanda. So you're right, Brooke, true crime is a lot about the crime and what happened, but I agree that the reason we're drawn to it is to see how the people are affected, how they react, how they survive, and what their stories involve in the aftermath of these horrible things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll bring it back to Halloween here to close, because I found it interesting piece on the Ingram Spark blog about the best books to publish in certain months. And of course, they did note that true crime is a good genre for October. No big surprise there. But I thought I would read these findings. That horror is number one. Readers are looking for dark, chilling stories to get into the Halloween spirit. True crime is number two. That October is a good time for both reflective and spooky reading. So nonfiction books in this genre or those that tap into psychological and supernatural themes will do very well. And then finally, interestingly, graphic novels with spooky or creepy atmosphere can certainly tap into the Halloween excitement, sometimes for kids, a little less intense and maybe a little more fun, which can be, a way to escape and to celebrate Halloween at the same time.
Yeah, it's not at all surprising to see this increasing momentum for true crime in light of, the popularity of true crime podcasts to begin with, and also documentaries and series. I know we have both watched Amanda Knox's series on Hulu called The Twisted Tale of Amanda Knox, and we're both watching until the very end of time, Only Murders in the Building. And then there are also, just so many true crime shows and podcasts out there, and it's a morbid fascination for sure. But here are a few reasons for this, just so you know you're not alone if you're obsessed by true crime stories. You're normal, you're healthy, you're well, balanced. So number one, true crime lets us engage with danger from a safe distance. We're actually evolutionarily wired to pay attention to threats, and true crime stories let us do that without being really threatening or truly being threatening. And two, we love mysteries and puzzles, and the best true crime involves that because there are things that need to be solved, even if sometimes the only solving is what would motivate someone to behave in the ways they behave. And then three, it's a way for us to explore the forbidden, by openly talking about violence, death, or deviance. That can be taboo, but true crime gives us permission to do so. And I'm sure there are other reasons in the mix here as well, but these are some of the ones that feel true and or resonate with me. And I hope our listeners get to explore true crime this month.
Yeah, me too. And one of the other ones that I'll say is that I always put myself in the shoes of the victims or the victims' families. Like it's some form of terrible empathy or something, but there's a draw there too, to step into that idea of like, oh my gosh, how terrible. What would I do? I can't imagine. Mm-hmm. But we all live in a space where it's totally possible that any one of us could be touched by a terrible crime, and people have been and are. And, I think we're drawn to things that scare us, to hypotheticals, to horror and pain and scary stuff. So much so that we also have this national event that celebrates scary stuff, so it's definitely in the culture. Halloween is already upon us. So as Grant said from the outset, we went dark. So happy Halloween week to all of you. Maybe line up a next true crime memoir that you hope to read. We had a few good ones, good suggestions here for you. We hope you have a good and safe week. We'll see you on the other side, which will be November. Crazy already. I'm thinking yikes, but we'll see you then.